The President of the United States will stand before the gathered nation Tuesday night and once again call out to the real evil here in America. People making too much money and not sharing the wealth via the already overwrought and bloated tax service. What is jokingly called the Robin Hood method loses its entertainment value when one considers what the President and his allies seem to always conveniently miss in this conversation. Let's welcome to Midpoint. He covers economics for the Washington Examiner and thus has the handle on what we'll hear and the reality of it all. Joseph Lawler joins us on Midpoint. Joe, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me on.
All right, let's get down to the bottom line here. The President says this is the right thing to do. It is time for the rich to help the poor. We need to help the middle class, and there's nothing more for us to do because this is what America needs at this time. To which, of course, those of you who cover it would say it back to the President. Joe?
Well, this is really, I think the first thing to notice about this is a big shift in strategy, essentially, from what the President has done over his first 6 years in office. You know, he's been successful in raising tax rates on high-income earners. That rate is back to where it was under President Bill Clinton. That's done. They don't have a real, the White House doesn't have a real interest in raising it beyond that. That's a big political fight that would cost them too much capital. But what they have said they would be interested in doing is cutting out a lot of what they call tax breaks that mostly accrue to high-income earners. And in this case, in this plan, people with a lot of investment income and their beneficiaries, the people that they'd be leaving bequests to. So it's a change from raising tax rates to going at those tax breaks.
All right, so let's look at it from the GOP side now, because when the President says this, obviously Republicans are going to be slammed immediately when they say it's not a good idea as being only for the rich. That's all you care about, the billionaires in the world. How do they effectively then fight back against this and make some kind of PC, PR headway, if you will, to prove to people that that's not what they're thinking about?
Right, and you know, that's a great point, that this is about messaging in the end. And we know the GOP is in control of the Senate and House. They're going to be the ones setting the agenda. So this really, this tax plan is really not much more than effectively, you know, a think tank white paper, an op-ed. It's not.
Yeah, but wait a minute,
really
hang on a sec, Joe. Isn't that
Sure.
part of the problem, though? Isn't that when you talk about the messaging, the President will get it out there. He will obviously tell people how great it is for the middle class. You will have the liberal media outlets and also the rest of the lawmakers carrying his water for him out. So no matter the fact that it's a Republican-controlled Congress, you're right about that, how still do they fight against it? Because the first time they say, Marco Rubio even said this is a non-starter, and you have the left saying right now, well, I guess, Mr. Rubio, that means you just care about the wealthy and you don't care about us. So how do they fight that?
That's a great question, and you know, I think the plan was formulated very well for that purpose. But there are things they can do, and remember, with the ability to hold hearings and with the, you know, Mitch McConnell being the Senate Majority Leader, Republicans have ability to turn up the volume as well. But here's what they'll do. There are a number of these provisions that they can illustrate how they will cut against people, not just the 1%, but in the middle class. For instance, one thing that Republicans have been very successful in doing over the past few decades is labeling any kind of tax on bequests as a death tax. That's something that does not pull well. Everyone aspires to leave something for their kids to be able to go on their own, go to school, buy a house, those things, and no one likes death taxes. So that would be, you know, one way of getting out one of the big taxes in this proposal. And all these provisions are going to, even if it's aimed at the 1% or aimed at Wall Street, what Republicans will try to do is show how either directly or indirectly these will also translate into higher costs for some middle class families.
Joe, let me try something on here, because in the last couple of weeks, we've had discussions here in the newsroom and with a lot of friends of mine who are economists about how there's so much in taxes that are already out there. We're talking about a gas tax, as a matter of fact, that can help pay for infrastructure improvements here because our roads and bridges are falling apart. Then again, somebody in the conversation said, what about the billions of dollars that we are wasting every single day on useless projects that are simply not being paid out to anybody but fat cats and all the different lawmakers sitting there putting it in their pocket? Now, let me ask you, would that be smart if the GOP came back and said, all right, look, here's 10, 20, 30 billion dollars, whatever, of badly spent money that's not going anywhere. Why don't we pull this money back in? Why don't we start doing a little bit about that instead of consistently shoveling money out there for projects that don't go anywhere?
Yeah, I think that'll be a key part of the strategy. You know, that's been the message highlighted by Republicans throughout last year's campaign and into the early days of this Congress is they want to stake out really um, clear opposition to President Obama's spending plans and a direction of their own, and taking on the big programs that are expensive, but also not raising taxes to pay for new spending under those programs, including the transportation spending one that you mentioned. I think that's a clear contrast they're trying to draw, and we're sure to see that. And as I said, you know, with control of the committees, with the majority, they can set the agenda, and that'll allow them to establish the terms of the conversation.
Do you think, though, the American people will hear that message from the GOP, considering there have been a lot of messages in the past about Obamacare and so many other things that they haven't heard to begin with?
That's a great question, and I think that it'll be a little bit tricky. I think it'll be interesting to see because, as you know, over the past two years or more, really Republicans have sought to use this same strategy that President Obama seems to be using now, which is present a plan for the middle class consisting of reforms to spending and to federal programs, but also using tax credits, using the tax code to lower middle class taxes. You've seen that with Marco Rubio had a plan to address the child tax credit, which would be effectively a tax cut using tax credits for working families. Paul Ryan has worked on similar plans, including one aimed at really low-income people, poor people, an anti-poverty program. So I think, yes, Republicans will have the strategy of making a pitch to voters with spending cuts and fiscal restraint, but they also have tried to use this messaging that President Obama is using now, too.
15-second answer from you, final word. The National Review Online editors called the Obama tax plan destructive social engineering. Do you agree with that label?
I don't know if that's my place to say, but it's certainly using the tax code for engineering. That's something that, as I just said, Republicans are moving in that direction as well. But the reality is, it's got to cut one way or the other. It's social engineering as it stands right now. The question is, to some extent, unfortunately, you know, do you reform it or do you use it to your own social engineering ends?
Robin Hood would be happy indeed. Joe Lawler,
Yeah.
Thanks so much for joining us. We'll look forward to the next time.
Thank you.
All right, we're back on the other side of a break with the sheer folly of considering a movie to be a recounting of history and how people need to understand Selma is not fact, but it is just a movie.
President Obama and congressional Republicans are about to engage in an all-out tax war. I'm Francesca Page, and this story tops your Newsmax Now update. The Commander-in-Chief is set to announce new tax hikes during his State of the Union address tomorrow night. House Speaker John Boehner calls the same top-bottom rhetoric we've come to expect from the president. And the New York Times reports the NSA